All right, so November 2024. Now that the year is just about over, I thought it'd be a good time for us to talk about how this market has been this year, what's changed, what hasn't changed, what may change, what will likely not change, and, kind of walk through, what to expect for this upcoming year, kind of strategize a couple potential things and what to consider for this upcoming year, essentially, right? If you take a look at the year as a whole, this current year, more or less things have been about the same, right? And I don't really want to waste too much more time on the doom and gloom, folks, because surprise, surprise, there has not been a market crash. If you want to talk about a crash of sorts, you could talk about the crash of inventory, right, and things or transactions as a whole. But in terms of the housing market crashing, that hasn't happened, and I don't actually see a real estate crash happening in the near future, right? Will there be a real estate crash? Probably, but the big asterisk there is when, and I don't see it happening anytime soon. So if you are going to swear that the housing crash is nigh, um, you might save yourself some time and just find another video, right? So there's that. Right. So uh, with this election cycle, it looks like there's been some volatility in terms of the mortgage rates. The way I like to look at this generally is going to be the 10-year Treasury yield, right? Will more or less be one indicator or a litmus test in terms of where the mortgage rates might be heading, right? It's not the only thing. It's not like they necessarily work in lockstep, because there are some other factors where they're going to assess risk still, right? But generally, from what I can tell, as we look at other experts in the field, they're saying, we might be looking at that 6% range. If things get kind of shaky, like really shaky, maybe we'll look at fives. But outside of something catastrophic or some kind of black swan event, I really don't see us being in that 4% range, right? So again, my crystal ball is broken, right? So make whatever inference you can or will. And I always encourage you to do your own research and come up with your own thesis. Me personally, as I am always looking for properties to buy, my thesis is just going to be going under the assumption that will likely be in that high six range for a bit. Mid-year 2025, we'll see what happens. I know that the Fed tends to cut rates, but again, for me personally, I'm looking at the unemployment rate, right? So if the unemployment gets really wild, I could see a scenario where even those who have houses in the 3%, 4% range, they might be in a situation where they say, you know what, dang, if we don't have income, we can't afford this amazing mortgage anyway. So you might be in that situation where you might see some more inventory come online. If I'm being honest, in the Northeast, especially New Jersey, New York, I don't know that we're going to see that big of an increase, right? So again, feel free to make up your own thesis there, but that's just mine, right? So for sellers, no, the way I look at this is going to be, if you are in the arena of selling, I would really focus on proper pricing, right? Ultimately, it's just at the end of the day, what you want to keep an eye on is your average days on market. And mind you, in your specific area, right? Please don't look at national averages. Please don't look at state averages. Look in your specific neighborhood. Get as fine tuned as you can, right? The more specific you can get, the better, most likely it will be for your understanding of how your specific area is doing, right? So what I typically like to do is I will start with, say, the 3 months. And now you get a sense of, hey, what are the typical prices that I'm actually closing on transactions for, and how long is it taking, right? And as depending on what information is available to you, you might have to expand out to 6 months, a year. I personally like to look at what the last 3 months have yielded, and give or take seasonality and things of that nature. So if you are also in a situation where it's been more than, say, 2 weeks and there have been zero offers being laid out, for me, that's a decent indicator. And I like to, it's not the only truth out there, but it is one indicator for me to look at and reconsider of, like, hey, are we pricing this property correct, right? And so it's just a matter of what the market perceives the value of this home to be. And this is where oftentimes, from a seller's perspective, you kind of have this deviation of what you think the house should sell for, because it is your home. And oftentimes in the residential space, there is that split, right? Oftentimes people value it more than the actual market will value it at. And so if it is too far out of line, we see these cases where, it's 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, month plus, and there's no offers. Okay. For me, that is a really big red flag in terms of there has to be a reason why no one has put an offer in, right? If you see, for instance, that first week it comes online, there really isn't much interest to even show the property. That is another indicator that something's wrong, right? Now, obviously, can there be a chance that the agent is just not marketing the property? I guess, right? I wouldn't rule it out, but in my experience, 9 times out of 10, it really is the pricing, right? So let's keep an eye on that and see what is actually going on, and make sure that you are, keeping a pulse in terms of what the activity is with these sales, right? Because again, I would often in this particular market, the properties that I see that do better, they might actually underprice it a little bit, and the strategy behind this is that it brings more people through the door. So the likelihood that you will have a bidding war that triggers, because again, not that much inventory, and the few buyers that are still, adamant about buying something, well, they may be more willing to fight for that house, right? Quite honestly. So make sure that you have a clear strategy in place, but make sure that please, 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 that you're not asking for like a 1.5 sticker price for a house that is actually worth $1 million, right? It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't. And it's not going to help you in getting this house sold, right? On the buyer side. And I think it's pertinent here at this point to note that a lot of buyers are kind of giving up because of usually a couple factors, right? I'm expecting to see a drop off in mortgage applications, and with the interest rates being what they are, they have seen that refis and purchase applications have dropped off, and I will suspect that will be more or less the same. We'll see how things change again as time progresses, but right now, a lot of buyers have kind of decided, you know what, we're going to sit on the sidelines for a bit and see what happens. Partially because of the instability, and others, it's going to be just because they're priced out of the market, right? At this juncture, again, it's really important for those who are not in the New York, New Jersey area to make sure that you understand how this operates. It's not going to work the way it does nationally per se. There still typically are enough buyers in the market who are willing to pay more than others, right? And so it's really, again, important for you to assess, hey, is it too rich for my blood, or is it too rich for the market? Okay. It's frustrating when you are going after these houses and in your mind, these are not worth it to you. But clearly, if it is, or, I see a lot of these houses where, as I talk to buyers, like, oh, it's too much, it's too expensive. And sure enough, within a month, there's an offer, it goes pending. And then within a couple months after, it's closed. Right. So for me, there's a clear distinction between, is it too expensive as it pertains to the market? Like, is that the market saying it's too much, or is it just too expensive for you? And it is an unfortunate conversation that I have to have sometimes. And if I'm being honest, I struggle with this myself sometimes when I'm looking for properties to buy, right? But it is something for us to really take a moment and tease that out and make sure that you understand where you are in that spectrum. Still, again, from a buyer's perspective, I really need to stress that you need to focus on what is affordable to you. As an aside, what I typically see folks do is they will take their pre-qualification or pre-approval and assume that that is the amount that we should go with when you purchase a house. I will strongly disagree. And what I will often tell them is, hey, if you have one, talk to a financial advisor, but really take a look at your actual finances, right? Just because you have a pre-approval for, say, $1.5 million doesn't mean that you could still afford it, right? Because the way it's calculated doesn't necessarily fully take into account your actual monthly spend, right? So I think it really behooves you to take an extra moment to figure out what your actual affordable monthly spend is going to be. And on top of the mortgage, make sure you factor in things like property taxes, right? Or do you have insurance considerations that you need to really think about? If there are repairs and things of that nature, like you really need to take a look at all these, including if it applies HOAs. Just to be clear, I mean, in my opinion, generally speaking, it's not that we are finding houses for you, but we are essentially there to make sure that the transaction goes smoothly and that we are looking out for your best interest in terms of liabilities, right? And make sure that there's a lot of components within this process of closing on a home. And so our duty or our job is to facilitate that in a manner that is hopefully it's never really stress-free, but where we could handle a lot of that for you. We'll coordinate, with the people that need to, whether it be attorneys, contractors, appraisers, whatever it is that is. Oftentimes we are there to help coordinate those things and make sure that things are moving along correctly. But we also, just years of experience, oftentimes there are a lot of trends and things that we are privy to that most people are not. If I see red flags, I'm gonna let you know. Give you an assessment of like what is the risk factor, right? So oftentimes, one of the things like for inspections, it's their job to highlight everything, right? But for instance, if you see some kind of punch list of like, here are 150 items, you might feel stressed out until you realize that, hey, like it's just like one or two, like there's a handful of things where it's literally just like, oh, the cover for an outlet is cracked. It really behooves you to sit and talk about like, what are these serious things, what are the not serious things. When it comes to looking at properties, right, I really encourage people to honestly look at what is important to you, right? And then kind of come up with a list of things that are non-negotiables or deal breakers, and really try to, tease out what are absolute necessities as opposed to wants, right? Or like, it would really be nice to have, right? Because sometimes, you're in a situation, especially when like markets like this, where maybe it's not a need, or like, and it's more of a, I would really like to have, but they really would like to have is something that maybe we just install it later, right, at a later time. For now, as long as all the needs are required, it'll get us into the house maybe at a cheaper price, and we'll work on the wants later, right? And I know it's not as popular these days, but part of the joy of owning a home is to make it your own, right? And you have time, right? Well, hopefully you have time, right? So there's that. So for some, it's the proximity to commuting options to work, right? Are you close to train stations, buses, subways, whatever, right? Maybe it's a drive and you don't want it to be more than half an hour, right? Some people are okay with 2 hours. I've seen that, and well, hats off to you folks, but not for me. But maybe it's school districts. If you have kids and you are very particular on that, it could be school districts. Maybe it's a lifestyle. Maybe you want to be close to certain types of, if you're a foodie, maybe like a certain area of fine dining, right? Or maybe there's some types of bar hopping lifestyles that you prefer. Whatever it is, just make sure that you kind of get an understanding of what that is. Please understand that, like, a realtor, just for ethics and I would like to keep my job reasons, um, we can't, for instance, tell you like, hey, this neighborhood are predominantly X type of, like this kind of ethnicity is predominantly here, or this I can't tell you anything that is technically considered a protected class. I can't, for me, that is something where you need to do your own due diligence. And I know a lot of people find this frustrating, and I've seen people go as far as, hey, then why am I paying you? Well, as much as I would love to help you in these areas, I can't, because I am bound by ethics regulations and stuff, right? So for me not to violate fair housing laws. So there is that. So now that we have those things squared away, one thing that I do like to encourage folks to do on top of everything else is just take an extra moment to kind of take a moment to really think about what is your, say, 5 to 10 year plan look like, right? And the reason I say this is because obviously there's no guarantee of where you're going to be in 5-10 years, but if you have specific plans in place, it really does behoove you to figure out, hey, like, is this house going to facilitate or be able to help us grow into that phase of life, right? And so, I know oftentimes people like to think in these like forever home situations, but again, I like statistics, and statistically, especially if you are, say, in your 30s, 40s, there's a good chance that this might not be a forever home, right? And so again, take a moment to really consider, hey, like, what is the purpose of this house? How long will I realistically stay here? And will this particular house be able to satisfy those needs for in the time that I'm living here, right? Now, if I'm being honest with this market, there are many people who are going to be turning to renting while they quote unquote wait out the storm. Now, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, this waiting will leave a lot of people kind of seeing the possibility of owning drift away. Okay. Unfortunately, a lot of people, there will be a lot of people who decide, hey, we'll wait for this crash to happen, and realize even by the time the crash comes, the affordability is so far out of reach that they're just never going to be able to afford a home, right? Um, but on the flip side, some people will realize that the money they save from the ownership of a home is actually working in their favor, because they will take that difference and invest in, they'll kind of divert those savings to investments and retirement funds and things of that nature, where it'll still be somewhere that helps them in the future years, right? So it's not all is lost, but the most unfortunate, I think, in these cases will be those who will miss their opportunity to afford a home, and whatever money is saved from owning a home is ultimately spent elsewhere. Hopefully not on frivolous things, but I've seen it happen a lot. And so it is important to mention, right? And so there is going to be a lot of folks who give pushback of like, what do you mean you're saving money by renting? Well, if you look at the typical monthly spend from owning a home, especially in the states of New Jersey and New York, specifically in the city or in, say, Bergen County, the likelihood that you are going to spend less on mortgage, property taxes, insurance, maintenance, as opposed to rent is highly unlikely, right? Oftentimes, it takes years for the mortgage to be less than your rent. And so, if I'm being realistic, especially if you are in these high cost of living areas, the reward for owning a home doesn't really math out until the latter half of most people's home ownership, right? Um, of course, there will always be room for like those who've snagged a good deal or maybe got lucky, or but generally speaking, um, if you really factor in the cost to maintain, or even especially if you're in a situation where you're renovating or things of that nature, chances are you're not going to be saving money, right? Things change if you get very creative or clever with your tax planning and how you structure, say, businesses and things of that nature. But look, I'm just talking about very generic home ownership. You have a W-2 job, you bought a house, and plain and simple, right? So for those who are currently uh, considering or looking, there are things that I like for folks to really pay attention to, right? Um, Obviously, a lot of folks have heard about how Florida is having issues and California is having issues with home insurance, right? Homeowners insurance. Uh, with the hurricanes, natural disasters, a lot of insurance companies have decided, what, we are no longer going to cover houses in this state. And if there is an insurance, usually it is astronomically high. So it makes the cost of home ownership really hard to stomach or afford in general. And now we are in an era where things like flooding in New York and New Jersey are things that we really need to start paying attention to, right? And so as you are considering homes, I do want you to, I do encourage a lot of folks to start looking at flood maps. Um, and if during your home search, if you are looking at, one of these home listing sites, you might see that some of them conveniently already have entered in the what are the natural disasters to consider in your area. Now, again, a realtor can only do so much, and we don't want to be in a situation where we are steering, which is illegal. So these are things that you will have to kind of research on your own to say, look, I might like this township, this city, this neighborhood, but and do I feel comfortable with if with any, say, flood risk, if any? Maybe this block has a higher probability as opposed to this block, so it does behoove you to take a look, right? Because this may affect your insurance rates. This may affect your ability to maintain your home, right? Or quite frankly, it could be your safety, right? So again, as home buyers, do yourself a favor, take a look, right? Um, and along those lines, I also would like to encourage folks to take a look at what would the insurance premiums look like, and if you can, see if someone could price it out for you. There are a lot of factors, and we could get into that, but there are a lot of things that affect your insurance premiums, right? And for one, it might be obviously it could be where the house is located, what type of house it is, what is the condition of the home, and what are the value of things that need to be insured, right? There are a lot of things. Talk to an insurance agent, right? I'm not an insurance agent, so I do encourage you guys to um, interview a few, get some quotes, and just get an idea of what that might be. Should you buy, say, a house in this area, right? Now, I also encourage you to look for open permits and violations. Um, this may be something that whether it's an agent, contractor, someone can help you with that, or depending on your jurisdiction or city, you may be able to do that on your own, right? So some things are made public and makes it easy for you to figure out, hey, like what is going on with this house. As I go through walkthroughs and show properties, I always encourage people to keep an eye out for new renovations that appear to be cheaply done, or like weekend warrior type jobs. As a general rule, after seeing so many quote unquote flips or turnkey properties, if I see something that is brand new renovation, like brand spanking new renovation, I tend to get more nervous now, right? And I know a lot of people think, hey, this is a brand new house essentially, and so we shouldn't need an inspection, right? I'm like, if anything, you should absolutely do an inspection and make sure that the renovations or the remodel or whatever was actually done correctly, done up to code, and that it is done safely, right? Because again, it's very easy for us to slap lipstick on the pig, but if it's hiding something very or like horrendous behind it, I would like to know, especially if I'm going to buy it, because a really cheaply done remodel, you might be happy with it for a year or two, but as things start to fall apart, you might be in a situation where now you might spend more money trying to fix whatever cheaply done job that was done than if you were to just say get a fixer upper and do it yourself from the jump. So just a word of advice there. And depending on where you are, you might be able to pull a CLUE report, which is a comprehensive loss underwriting exchange. What it essentially is, it's kind of like Carfax for real estate. And what it is it checks to see if there were any insurance claims against the house. So obviously, a home inspector or home inspection will help you, find a lot of potential faults with the house. But obviously, they can only do so much, right? And so one of the things that might help you in kind of figuring out if there have been other major issues to consider is by pulling this report and saying, hey, were there any other things that required an insurance claim to cover, say, damages, right? Was there a flooding issue? Was there the roof leaked to a point where they had to replace things? Were there structural damage? Like whatever it is, again, it's no 100% guarantee, but it should help narrow down potential issues, right? Similarly to looking up like open permits and violations. If there are violations on the house, well, it may be one of those things where it might highlight certain work that was done in the past, or it may highlight that there's some issues now that I would like to know before buying a house to know what I'm getting into, because some things may require more money to fix than it's worth, right? And so again, please make sure you do your due diligence. One thing that a lot of people don't think to do, but I've found could be more helpful, especially when we're buying in New York City, maybe even parts of New Jersey, is do yourself a favor and check the CO or the certificate of occupancy. With a lot of things changing, a lot of people adding in ADUs, extensions, and things of that nature. But the problem here is if you are making changes, and let's say they want to reflect that or show a piece of property like it's like a 2-family house and it's not, or rather there's no CO for it, you might be asking for trouble, right? Like there are lots of instances where, hey, look, looks like it's a finished basement with a full kitchen, but there's a separate entrance in the back, and so, oh, look, this looks like a 2-family house. It turns out it's a single-family house. The CO only shows it's for a single-family house, and so I've had a property where unfortunately there was issues that are similar to this, except the DOB was made aware. And so what had happened was they were in a situation where they're being taxed up to wazoo because they're being taxed as a multifamily. and there's a whole mess involved with it. So please make sure that you check that. Now, as a buyer, one of the things that I really harp in on is the fact that you should never waive your home inspection. One of the reasons is because you don't know what is possibly wrong. And sometimes the sellers honestly don't either, right? Oftentimes, people live in their house for decades and don't realize that there were issues until they go to sell the house, right? The problem, again, here is I would rather not buy a home that has major issues and I'm stuck with a potentially, $50,000 bill because, let's say there were cracks in the siding and it was leaking water, right? So one of the things here, and both sides of this transaction should be aware that if there are major defects and it comes up in a home inspection, now those have to be disclosed from that point forward to everyone, right? If it is not, so let's say, there are a lot of homes that have, especially in Long Island, I'm seeing where they are, that they were on oil, right? Or like, you have the truck come in and as opposed to gas that is hooked up to from a municipal line. Some people may just bury that tank, right? Which, or maybe the tank is not in great shape, but uh, sometimes people will paint over it, paint it just to make it look pretty and not realize that it's in rough shape, right? If it comes up in a home inspection that, hey, look, this tank is on its last leg and honestly, this is something that needs to get changed out. And the problem here is sometimes that might be a $50,000-$60,000 job if it's stuck in a basement and they need to like open up a wall or whatever, right? And so these are things that come up, or maybe the chimney has some massive issues and there is a significant amount of work that needs to get done. Regardless of whether the homeowner says, hey, we never use this fireplace, it may not matter, right? So please make sure that you get the home inspection. And from a seller standpoint, understand that if there are major defects that come up in these home inspections, you are required to disclose them for any buyers going forward, right? Now, does that mean that you should just say, absolutely not, we're not buying this house? No, right? But I would try to see if there is any room for negotiation, if that is what the parties require, and just to see if you can make sense and make this deal make sense for both parties involved, right? Again, it is up to the buyer and seller to figure out what that is, but the agents are there on your behalf to make sure that no one's taking advantage of you and that we are protecting your rights. So lean into them, do what you got to do, but these are some things that we want to look into. Now, what do I feel for what I think this upcoming year is going to look like? I had originally had high hopes for this coming spring, but I think that's more hopium because of the moves that I was hoping to make. But honestly, I feel like there's going to be more of the same. I think at this point, buyers, sellers, stick to your fundamentals. Sellers, make sure that you are pricing appropriately or you are really shooting yourself in the foot. Understand that most buyers are fatigued. A lot of buyers are on the sideline, but there are enough buyers in the market to pay, who are willing to pay what will be a reasonable market price. I don't see people paying outrageous prices for real estate anymore. In fact, if you think that your neighbor sold a house for, say, $1 million, I would generally assume that you're not going to get a $1.5, sales price just because it's 2025, right? One thing that I want to keep in mind is just please take note of the activity or levels of interest people have in your house. And also, if you are repeatedly getting a certain level of offers in reasonable time frame, that is an indicator. Now, I'm not saying you necessarily have to take them, but please, let's exercise common sense, right? Buyers, unfortunately, for you folks, I don't see a crash happening, and because I don't necessarily see a huge influx of inventory coming online for you to offset some of these prices. Just assume that you're going to be where you are. Well, the market is going to be where it is for quite some time, right? At the very least, I'm going to assume for the next at least 6 months to a year. The only thing that I might see really shift this out is if there are some drastic changes in unemployment, right? Now, there's a current conversation that is in terms of like, hey, maybe we should reduce regulations to increase the supply end of things, but there's a lag with that, right? So just because, even if that were to happen across the board and it's really drastic, understand that it takes time for still buildings to be put up and things to be changed. So keep that in mind. Now, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. And yeah, catch you guys on the next one. Peace.